For generations, we in the United Kingdom have enjoyed democratic local government. We've elected councillors for our town or county councils. Many of us have volunteered to be parish councillors, unpaid, to do our bit for the village. But within a year or two, it will all be gone. Most of it has gone already. The Treaty of Rome was the death knell for democratic government. Today, county, borough and parish councils are all giving way to regions, to sub-regions and sub-sub-regions, the European Union's system of local government. But it's taken time to destroy what was British and replace it with the European model. John Major began the rot with government offices in the regions, new divisions, never before known in this country. But when Tony Blair won that landslide victory in 1997, the destruction accelerated. London, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland now have their own elected assemblies. The one in Edinburgh is grandly called a parliament. They may think they have a large measure of independence and freedom, but each is just a region in the European Union. And what about the rest of England? That's divided into 8 regions, the South West, the South East, the East Midlands and so on, but with appointed assemblies. When people in the North East gave a resounding thumbs down to an elected assembly, the appointed assembly just carried on regardless. But assemblies don't matter. Elected or not, they're just wallpaper. One assembly member told me that he got his massive pile of papers just days before a meeting, and he had no real idea of what was going on. Only the few who drive this process know. They're the assembly officers, the permanent staff, confident, powerful, professional. They're the real power brokers. It's a charade of democracy. The new regions are getting more and more power. Planning. How we can use our land, British land, has already been removed from elected local and county councils and is directed from Brussels. Every region's plans now have to fit into the Brussels plan. Soon it will be the turn of the police and their new super regional forces. Will they answer to the European Union's police force, Europol, in The Hague? Soon London will be just a regional capital and not a focus of the nation state, because there won't be a nation state, just a collection of European regions. Britain will have disappeared.
As you have seen, since 1972, the balkanization of Britain into 12 EU provinces has continued apace, so that today the process of deconstructing Britain is almost complete, and there is nothing our politicians seem willing to do about it, albeit that it is in defiance of our own constitution. So, is this the end of Britain and the right of the British to govern themselves? Is EU membership, as some would have you believe, inevitable? And is there an alternative to being part of a European federal state? Well, here are 2 views of the future from 2 very different standpoints. First, Ian Milne again.
The story of the next 50 years is going to be the rise and rise of the world outside the EU, where the other 94% of the population of the planet lives. In that vibrant, growing 94%, the independent, self-governing nation is the rule, not the exception. Our English-speaking cousins in America, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, Singapore are proud to be self-governing nations. The world's second biggest economy, Japan, is proud to be a self-governing nation. So are those coming superpowers, China and India. For all these countries, big and small, the idea of surrendering the power to govern themselves, as Britain has done, to a supranational bureaucracy, and a corrupt one at that, is literally incomprehensible. We're the 3rd biggest trading nation in the world, ahead of Japan, and the 5th biggest economy in the world. We're the headquarters of the Commonwealth, that voluntary association of English-speaking, self-governing nations, with members on 6 continents and almost 1/3 of global population. So the claim that we'd be isolated outside the EU is pure, unadulterated nonsense. Just think of the benefits of reclaiming our independence by leaving the EU and joining that growing 94% of the world. First, trade. We already do 50% more of our trade outside the EU than with the EU. And our exports outside the EU are growing faster than our exports to the EU. We'd focus on the Asia-Pacific region, which is currently growing 5 times as fast as the EU. We'd resume our seat and vote at the World Trade Organization. We'd resume our trading alliances with our friends in the Commonwealth. And we'd strike up new ones with the Asian tigers. Not least, free of the immoral EU Common Agricultural Policy, we'd help the poorest nations in the world by offering them free access to our own markets. Second, defence. It's NATO that's kept the peace in Europe, not the EU. Free of the EU, we'd be able once again to refocus our efforts on NATO, not as at present on the European army that the French and Germans are determined to foist on us. Third, we save huge amounts of our own taxpayers' money. No longer will we hand over £13 billion a year to the EU, a sum that would buy us 12 new hospitals or 4 new aircraft carriers every year. And, as the Chancellor has admitted, we'd save an awful lot more by throwing off the burden of regulation we don't need and by being outside the ruinous Common Agricultural Policy. But most important of all, we'd get our democracy back. That's what getting back sovereignty means. Our own Westminster MPs would once again have the sole power to run our government, a power they've now abandoned to the EU. And we, the citizens, through our right to hire and fire them, would get back control of our own government. After withdrawal, what happens? We continue as members of the United Nations, of NATO, of the Commonwealth, of the World Bank, and so on. We make it clear to the rest of the EU that they're our friends and allies. We keep free trade and free movement of capital with the rest of the EU, because they'll be desperate to keep on selling us BMWs and Renaults and Camembert cheese. We're their biggest single customer worldwide. They sell us far more than we sell them, which means that more of their jobs depend on trade with us than on the other way round. Finally, how do we get out? It's simpler than you'd think. First, we get the support of the British people in a referendum, and then we repeal the 1972 European Communities Act, by which we joined the then common market. That's all we have to do. The rest is detail.
There is much more we could have told you about the European Union. The fact that it operates a system of bookkeeping enabling massive and continuing fraud, resulting in its own auditors failing to accept and sign off the books of account for any of the years since 1994. The fact that all the important decisions affecting you and I are taken behind closed doors, in total secrecy, and the fact that all the people who make those decisions are unelected to those positions, unaccountable to anyone, and largely unknown. But time does not permit. Whatever happens from now on depends very much on you. You must make up your mind as to what kind of country you want to live in, and in which your children can grow in freedom. If you are disturbed or concerned by what you've seen in this film, please don't take our word for it. Check it out for yourself. A list of books, pamphlets and other sources are included at the end of this film. Vladimir Bukovsky spent a total of 12 years in Russian psychiatric prisons and labor camps for defending human rights during the 1960s and 1970s. His last period of imprisonment